welcome to Bitstorm, a comedy game design podcast by two guys who know nothing about comedy nor game design. I'm Ben Slinger. With me, as always, is Trevor Scott.
Hello.
Hello.
How are we?
Yes, good. And so we've just been discussing what we're going to do on this week's episode, and that is that we're going to do something a little bit different. We are going to, in a similar vein to when Jim Fishwick, video game curator, came on, we're going to delve back into the history of gaming and sort of talk about some games that, you probably know and love, but, follow a particular thread through gaming history. So this week, we're going to delve into the amazing story, really, of game developer Olli Zanetti.
Oh, yes.
And we'll go back and we'll talk about his earliest games.
When he was a childhood prodigy and...
A childhood prodigy, logged into Prodigy, the online service. In fact, that's how I think, he kind of got into the whole, learned a lot of his early skills. But he was also a prodigy, but all the way up to his modern games, where we know as sort of the director of some amazing AAA games from the current day. So, yeah, I think we'll basically tell his story through his games.
Yeah.
And so, to begin with, Trev, I think you maybe wanted to start off.
Yes. So we'll start off with his earliest game, which was Miniature Graveyard Party, which was a ROM hack for the Super Nintendo. Yeah,
so, I mean, this is part of why, he was such a prodigy, because it wasn't easy to get started in game development back in the days of the Super NES and that sort of thing.
Definitely not.
Particularly if you wanted to make games for those consoles. But yes, he managed to sort of get his game onto, like you said, a ROM hack.
Yeah, and it was, 1993. All that you got around in how you learn this stuff is not via the internet. It's through BBS boards and all this sort of stuff. And, if you wanted to actually play any of these games, back in the day, you used to have to log into one of these BBS boards, download something that would then give you instructions on how to, wire some things up to, like, your cartridge, and then send down the ROM hack to like...
Exactly. So that the console would actually read it correctly and actually load it up. Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, let's then enough about the technology. We all know the technology works, because otherwise, Olli Zanetti, it would have just been one game and
that's
one
it.
game and done.
And it's we bring it up because it's impressive that at the age of 12 he was doing that.
Yeah,
but it's more. This basically became a bit of a cult hit around the bulletin boards at the time, and then obviously in recent years, like, emulators have been able to pick it up and play. So yeah,
what I find so funny is, or what I find so like insane is, this is like a precursor to like the Mario Party games.
Yeah,
and the fact that it was all in miniatures, and to actually show like the miniatures in the very low resolution that the SNES had, yet you could still tell that they were miniature characters in a graveyard, and they were on like a board game sort of thing. And it was just...
Yeah, there were some really impressive sprite techniques that he used in sort of some of the backgrounds and some of the sprites themselves to kind of get that across, that these were miniatures. Like, it was almost supposed to be like, playing the little D&D game or a board game.
Playing a legitimate board game.
Yeah, which I don't think it'd be done at the time. Like, it sort of the way that it got that across with some really ingenious kind of techniques, and the way that it almost gave you that sense of a depth of field, even though obviously with these sprites, just some really clever sort of lighting techniques and things. To like tinting the sprites in different ways.
Yeah, and to really give that... Well, I know that he used a little bit of Mode 7 in there, and for those people who don't know, Mode 7 was like a pseudo 3D mode that the Super NES had access to, and he managed to use both sprites and the Mode 7 mode at the same time to get that real depth of field happening on the screen while also looking like a board game. But the really cool thing is that his whole game had all this backstory and a real history to the graveyard.
Well, and what was interesting, I think, 12-year-olds have a lot of time on their hands. Really, they're they're independent enough.
Too young to start masturbating.
Yes, exactly. You got there before me. Independent enough to have the time, too young to start jerking off. So he had just chapters and chapters of backstory around this graveyard and its history, not all of which made it into the game. A lot of it was distributed as text files alongside the ROMs. And so it's really only the key fans who got a lot of that backstory. But you could see playing it if you had read that, how it made its way into the games.
Yeah, and look, there were some thoughts within the community that if you were able to get off the board, supposedly there was this one rumor going around that if you rolled kind of like Monopoly rules where you roll doubles X number of times in a row because you do get an extra turn on each double, unlike in Monopoly where after 3 times you go to jail. Supposedly after 30 times of doubles in a row you actually hop off the board,
right?
And then you can go to other gravestones and find out some lore about some of the other gravestones. But of course, that's just a rumor. And I remember reading something about it in the old Green Guide, that came with the Age on Thursdays.
Yep.
Yeah.
I used to look forward to that thing coming every week.
Yeah, there was a section in there.
I was game obsessed, and
that had, it was the only way at that time how to find out about A, the new games coming out, B, how to get hints for the bloody games that you were stuck.
Yeah, that, and I was starting to collect Hyper Magazine and that some of the Australian game mags that were out, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was a remarkable amount of gameplay in there again for something that was distributed in this way and just built by a 12-year-old for one, and the fact that it was multiplayer with the and even more than 2 players with hot swapping and stuff. Hot swapping. What am I talking about? Hot seats.
Hot seats.
Hot seat play. It was a full basically a full release.
Yeah. Oh, we haven't even talked about the music. He put a whole heap of music together and sound effects and it was pretty impressive that he was able to do all this stuff at 12 years old with no internet.
Yeah.
So the mini games. What were some of your favorite mini games? Because we did play this.
Yeah. We obviously gave it a go in preparation for the episode. Look, I liked the whacker zombie mode mini game. That was fun for how simple it was.
Yeah.
The fact that you had to kind of that you each had your own mallet, but you had you couldn't just. There was collisions, even you couldn't push past each other. You had to, so you kind of had to strategize,
kind of go around and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. You could sort of block people from they're going for that zombie. You can get in their way, and if you get there first or whatever, they can't get over there.
I know that at one stage you were blocking me in the corner so I couldn't get out anywhere, and because you were 2 zombies ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. Just wait it out.
I really, really liked the kind of like it was the community chest or whatever of this thing where you could choose which grave your reward was in, and then you had like the sort of decathlon-esque thing of having to
tapping the buttons,
tapping the buttons to like dig the grave faster, and the faster that you dug the grave, the better the reward it was.
Well, I liked how you could kind of fuck over your friends in that one too, because if you got it right, then like it randomly chose your like the bad choices could go to your friends, and then they had to do like a button mash thing to try to fight it off and get less of a thing. Like you screwed me over on that a couple times.
Yeah, well, I had that whole technique where you get your shirt and you just rub your finger over the button really fast.
Yeah.
It's
Rex destroyed many a
shirt and many a controller.
Many a shirt and many a controller, exactly.
Yeah, and look, you could tell that Nintendo, they weren't very happy because they literally stole the whole star idea from him. Of course, they weren't stars in this; they were skulls. But
yeah, they obviously took it. Yeah, they couldn't use skulls for Mario Party.
No, but you had the skulls. You had coins that you'd be picking up, or cash anyway.
Yeah. Well, there's sort of a grave robbing implication there, because as you did go around this graveyard, you'd get these coins and things. It's like, where are you getting the coins from? But
grave robbing, yeah.
I mean, as we know, like Olli was going through a bit of a goth, phase, and we'll talk about the next game in a sec too. But so I'm not surprised that Nintendo had to lighten it up a bit when they, essentially wholesale ripped him off for Mario Party.
Yeah, and look, going back to the audio, one of the things that I did like that he did, he kind of took what was happening in a lot of the games at around that time, like Doom was about to come out, and they'd done like the initial music actually is almost a MIDI copy of Master of Puppets, and so what he did is he almost created his own thing from, as you said, goth, grunge, all this sort of stuff that he was into at the time. Yeah. There was like definitely Smells Like Teen Spirit in there, like as the.
I think that there was some inspiration for sure.
Yeah, inspiration.
Yeah, you can tell.
Inspiration. And you could sing along to it for the most part.
Well, yeah, okay. Interpolation, then, as they call it.
Interpolation. That's
yes.
a little bit better.
Yeah, and look, again, just impressive at how well he pulled that off on the audio limitations of the Super NES at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was some banging music in there. It worked really well.
And that reminds me of the next game.
Well, yeah, let's move forward to the next game, which, I think this was one, after that release, he put this one out in a similar way, but he sort of was stealing the shareware model that Apogee and whatever and id Software were making good use of for a while. I think he realized, I can distribute this game, but then maybe make some money to send the full version to people later on. And so this was another ROM hack that he put out. I think this one seemed a bit of like it rushed it out. I think maybe he kind of had that idea of the shareware thing. This was Occult Rugby creator.
Yep.
So again, he's got the sort of the goth, dark, death theme going on. It did also start in a graveyard, and I think he, reused some of this, obviously reused some of the graphics and that sort of thing.
Well, there was a board game sort of. Well, it looked like it was supposed to be a board game that was sort of sitting there that in the graveyard that as you left it.
Yeah, it was almost a meta, sort of a meta reference back to his previous game. But this was a very different game, and it was essentially almost an early football manager style thing, which was funny. I guess again, it was just what he was into at the time as a. By this stage, a 13, 14-year-old.
It kind of feels like nowadays you'd sort of almost say that it's kind of Football Manager mixed with Blood Bowl.
Well, that's it, exactly. So I was yes. It obviously, you were managing the team, but you fully played out the game. Like, it had a full, rugby game in there in this way.
But it also had lots of occult sort of stuff, like witches and necromancers and...
Yeah, so you could build up your team, decide on what sort of type of unit, I suppose, what type of player, what type of creature each player was.
Yeah.
And then they'd have their different techniques and their different skills that they could use, different speeds. Zombies are obviously quite slow, but, you can't stop them.
Yeah. And look, the fact that it was rugby, you could kind of tell that even though he's Australian, he's obviously from either New South Wales or Queensland. We didn't know this at this stage, but,
yeah.
Obviously, nothing against him. I'm not a big rugby fan, but... No,
me neither. It was a fun game, though.
I still thought that he did a good job. You could use sort of those Frankenstein's monsters as, your big sort of defenders, and then you had...
that was always a good technique, because they took up more space, and it made it a lot harder to get past them on the, the sort of top-down view as well.
It would have been good if this did have multiplayer, but unfortunately it did just have the single-player campaign.
Yeah, look, I think he was, obviously he'd had multiplayer in the Graveyard Party, but it was hot seat. It was like turn-based.
Yeah.
You could technically play that first one on just a single controller and pass it around. I think he hadn't quite figured out getting the actual multiple inputs and stuff in there. As clever a game designer and developer as he obviously was for his age, plus I think, as I said, the shareware thing. So there was a lot of game in the main version, but you could essentially mail him at his house. Like, he had his address in the game, which was kind of an odd, his parents probably weren't too happy about it.
See, that was only in the very first version. Like, he did eventually update it. Like,
yeah, but that first version was still getting spread around.
Yeah, it did.
and so he released essentially almost like, again, ahead of his time, DLC for this thing. Like, it wasn't that the additional episodes were really added much more gameplay, but you could get different teams. You could get different units that were added into the additional things, and he'd just send you a floppy disk, if you pay him whatever it was, like $5, and you could expand on your game.
The only problem was that because this was, a little bit later in the time, the internet is just sort of coming around, and BBSs aren't so popular, anymore. That there were a lot of like full version codes available.
Yeah, you could find the file, fairly easily. It started getting shared around as well. But, I think this is what he said in his biography, but, this is essentially what then funded him, or like convinced his parents as well, to let him, take time off school and work on his next game, which was obviously, his first one that was, he found a publisher for and was actually released not just in this sort of bootleg ROM hack way. But again, just like, the way he managed to take advantage of the shareware trend at the time and really capitalize on that for something like another, these two Super NES ROM hacks, which, had a fairly limited audience. It was impressive that it got as far as it did.
Yeah. So we jump forward, like a number of years.
Yeah.
End of the PlayStation 1's life cycle. He's moved on from Nintendo. Everyone thought that his next game, because it didn't come out, the N64's, just having come out and all this sort of stuff. But no, he ended up going over to the Sony PlayStation.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, sticking with 2D.
I remember at the time there was a bit of talk because he went silent for a long while, for quite a number of years.
I mean, by the time that this came out, we're talking 98, 99. By the time it actually came out,
like 4 or 5 years, and that's a long time. We've now gone from, essentially like the dawn of the internet to, I mean, it's still early internet days, but like the internet picked up fast in the late 90s. There, so many more people. His games got a lot more. They were still being shared around, but everyone's like, I guess, just like this flash in the pan. Like it almost became a internet history, story that was being shared around of like this prodigious kid from the BBS days or whatever, and then he, shows up with his next game.
Yeah. So, Attack of the Banjo.
Yeah.
Is, I've got to say, like you can tell that he took a lot of these inspirations from, your Castlevania. That Symphony of the Night had come out.
Yep.
And he's just like, you know what? I could make a cool side-scrolling sort of thing that worked very similar to that, and it blew it out of the water. Like, it was massive.
What was... Yeah, so what I find so interesting about this game is because, like, the Super NES and the Mega Drive were kind of the king of that genre. And like already, like there was a ton of games, side-scrolling sort of things that came out. But what's impressive is he's obviously, grown up. He was playing these games through his teenagerhood, and he was just like, I can do this, but better. And I think it was that it took until the PlayStation
to realize this vision,
have the power to be able to realize that vision,
and also the size, because it took up 3 CDs.
Yeah, and for a 2D side-scrolling game, that's a lot of area. That's a lot of content.
Half the stuff on each of these CDs was just the music, because he used CD audio and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and he wrote hours of music for this stuff. He compressed it right down, so it was, there was some in CD audio format, there was some in the actual, in like MIDI file format itself, so that, he didn't have to go crazy. Basically, when he wanted his full band, of which he obviously played the banjo, when he wanted that to be forefront, then obviously the MIDI version of a banjo doesn't sound like a banjo, so he just used the CD audio.
He used
for that.
The full recorded audio.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and this is the thing, the music was so key to the gameplay, which, was just something we hadn't seen, particularly in this genre, before this. And
again, I love the fact that, he took where the Occult rugby thing finished in that stadium, and that's where you start this game. Like, you start in the stadium, like the game is just finished, and your character's walking out with their banjo. And it's like
early, you could sense his, like, you could see his sort of his desire for continuity, like that these were not just individual games that he was creating. He was, it was this path, it was this line between them. Even though each game's so different from the one before. Yeah.
I mean, this one had, of all things, banjo dueling. Like,
yeah,
the bosses that you went up against, it felt like, oh god, is this just Deliverance? But no, it had such...
Well, but then the combination of the platforming, some fairly classic platforming kind of boss fights, with really, having to do a lot of bullet hell kind of dodging and hitting the weak points and that sort of thing, but then utilizing that banjo for, the special techniques with the shielding and stuff that you had really added another layer
and
to
also the fact that you could literally just attack with the banjo, because the banjo in this was super strong. Like, it never went out of tune. Oh, except for the one tuning mini game, of course. We'll get to that.
Yeah, the story base. Yeah, story reasons for that.
And that was a pivotal moment in the entire game. We can't discount that. But I'm glad that it wasn't a continual thing that you had to worry about the banjo going out of tune.
Well, and then that was the other thing that really took up a decent amount of space on the CDs was, as we saw with all of the lore he wrote for Miniature Graveyard Party around the history of the graveyard and different things, and which was somewhat missing from the Rugby game, I think, because he was, that was a bit more of a rushed project and he was trying to really take advantage of the shareware thing. In this one, that lore is back. Like, there is backstory to this game. Every area, every character, you can have these big conversations with the characters and like learn a lot about them. You can see that he was such a writer at heart as well for these games. What
I've really loved was, like, when you first leave the Rugby place and you go into the city, like. Yeah. It's fairly linear. And then as soon as you get into the city, anytime you come across a crossroad, you hit the up button and he flips into, it's now you're on that street and you can go up to the next street and flip in. And depending on which way which side of the road depends on which side of the screen you actually get and who you're fighting up against.
It was essentially an open world. It was essentially an open world from, back on the PlayStation. In a 2D side scroller, you could pick up that map and it told you all the streets and you'd give you a sense of where you were, but you could just wander and go down this street and you'd see the street names. You could start to get a sense of like how everything's laid out.
I noticed for the first probably 4.5 hours of me playing, I was just searching the city. No combat at this stage.
Yeah,
I hadn't even got my banjo yet, and I'm like, yeah. I actually went to there was a cash converters in one of the streets, and I saw a banjo in the shop, and I was trying for literally an hour to raise enough money to get that, but not realizing
you have to do the quest to
But that's part of the whole busking quest, and it would have been good for him to let that be known, but then again, there was no way to get that sort of money.
It's definitely so. Interestingly, to compare it to a very modern game, it had that Elden Ring feel of you weren't handheld through this. You had all these places you could go. You could just find these side stories. You could talk to these people, and there were all these interconnecting relationships between the people that you'd run into on this street. This is all in the world before you've even got your banjo and can start actually going on the combat quests, through the more linear sort of dungeons as they were. Not literal dungeons. Some were literal dungeons, but some were just, there was a lot of
some were sewers, even
areas, sewers, forests, there was a ton of stuff. But yeah, just the amount of work. And, again, it comes out in his biography, the reason, it's not just that he'd been writing this game for years, and it wasn't until the PlayStation came out that he was like, oh, now I have the ability to actually put this into practice. The actual development of the game was relatively short.
Yeah.
He just spent so long, building up these backstory and these characters, and you see scans of his notebooks and stuff. It's so interesting to see the way that he's mapped out these relationships between the characters.
I literally don't know how anyone read any of the stuff that he wrote, though, because that was all chicken scratched. It was worse than the Doctor.
No. You couldn't read. You couldn't read the actual pages really, but you get a sense of, and obviously the biography goes over some of the over the things.
So, you did mention Elden Ring before, and that's something I did want to bring up. The fact that when you picked up something, you did have that whole, you go into inventory and you can read a little bit of lore about this item that you've just picked up. Yeah. Which is very Elden Ring. In fact, I reckon they stole it from it. because he was the only one doing this. Like
again,
then again, I'm not sure. Kingsfield may have already come out. Like
there's inspiration, and it's just obviously very clear that Olli Zanetti was
ahead of his time,
and he was just defining. You know, he was finding new things that games hadn't really been doing at the time. And that naturally leads to that sort of mechanic or that sort of idea becoming just a part of games then, like future games. So while you can, I think, trace certain things back to his games, whether he did it first or just did it well first, early on. I think it's, I don't think you call it stealing. I think it's just, again, it's just he was the one who really brought it into the gaming world, and then other developers and things started, picking up on those.
And this is
ideas.
really where he did do a lot of his own music. He composed a lot of it. He had his it was very Ollie style. Like the style was just shouted his name. It still had that sort of those weird textures on it, and he had that distinctive visual style, and obviously the higher resolution of the PlayStation and such gave him the ability to really play with that more. Especially because it looks so high resolution. Like,
I'm not sure that he's ever beaten this, like made a game better than this, in my opinion. Like, even though obviously with higher budgets and more resources later on, I don't know that he's ever quite reached the heights of just, and I say the height, more the depths.
Yeah, the depths.
The depth of this game.
Should we
since then.
Should we talk about the ending and how heartbreaking that was?
Yeah. I think we can afford to spoil a 25-year-old game.
I mean, if you haven't played it by now, like, Attack of the Banjo is 98, 3 CDs, like, on PlayStation. I'm sure you can find, like... I saw one at Cash Converters the other day, which I found quite funny, because there was a Cash Converters.
It's really a crime that they haven't, remastered it yet. But.
He Ollie, we talked to him,
Yeah.
We talked to him a little while ago. We were trying to get him on the podcast, and he's turned into a bit of a recluse, so he doesn't really want to be involved. Well, that's it. And I think,
he very cleverly or just, shrewdly held onto the rights of all his games. I mean, obviously, particularly these early ones, but... And yes, he has been resisting remasters and things because he feels like it's not...
It's done. It's already done. Like, he's done with that. He wants to move on to the next game. He doesn't need to look back.
Yeah, I think it's a shame, because I think for, like, younger people, who weren't around at the time, to be able to play it, even if it's not like a full remaster, just the ability to play it on modern... obviously you can get it, you can emulate it or on PC and stuff, but
and as
I'd like
we
to
talked
see a
about
release.
in Jim Fishwick's thing, the best way to experience it is through EMU VR. So you're in like your childhood
VR, yes,
kid's room, and you're watching on like a big screen. And
that is always very nostalgic. So
it's really cool. But anyway, so this is after you've travelled down into the depths of like the sewers, you've crossed the mountains, you've gone through, the very quick Dracula's castle part, which was, just a harken back to the monsters that you sort of found in the other games. And, at this stage he's cleaned it all up, and he's going up against his arch nemesis, which happens to be his music teacher.
Yeah.
And they have the big Banjo duel, kind of feels very Deliverance. He wrote it all very similar to, another game that came out around this time, which was the Banjo duel in Monkey Island 3, Curse of Monkey Island. But in this case, instead of, doing the whole and choosing the individual strings, you had to play a lot of the solo. Like, you were sort of using the shoulder buttons and that sort of stuff to play the different notes and go through. But anyway, I just remember you get to the end, and if you don't do the quick time event absolutely perfect, a crack forms in his banjo.
Yep.
And
which is
the headstock literally falls off.
Very significant, given how much this banjo has held up throughout the game, and the relationship that has been built essentially between your main character and the banjo, and what it means to him. And I mean, I think it's fairly obvious. It's fairly obvious that this was a pretty personal story for Olli as well.
Very much so.
And he's kind of, we haven't talked about it because it's not really the podcast for it, but his music career and music history, his history with music, obviously running alongside his game development and playing a big part in the inspiration back and forth there.
Yeah. So when I first played this, I thought this is the end. I obviously got the bad ending, but it turned out to be the most uplifting ending when he just drops the banjo and he looks at his music teacher dead in the eye and says, "I don't need a banjo for this."
Yeah.
Puts his fingers into the approximate position and just goes Wayne's World on him and just starts,
air banjo.
Air banjo. And, the hair starts, raising up on the music teacher's head as he starts being pushed back through, all this power.
It's such a powerful thing. You start seeing kind of the ghostly form of the banjo in his arms, fading in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's really just well done dramatic timing, and it's a great ending. I mean, I said, I don't think
you can also finish the game just with the actual banjo, and you miss all this.
Yeah.
So I think the real canonical ending, and we'll go over this again because the next game actually it
plays into it.
It plays into it because obviously the next game starts in this exact ice temple, where obviously the final banjo duel happens in this game.
Yeah.
But just thinking about those people who finished the game with the actual banjo and didn't make those couple of mistakes to actually see, him pick up the just air banjo.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You thought you got the bad ending, but you essentially got the best ending.
Yeah.
It definitely loses a bit if you don't, take that path. Since we're there, let's move on to the next game, which, and anyone who's followed his career will know that following on from what was essentially his magnum opus into this was his probably his low point.
Yeah. Well, first foray into 3D, so it was always going to be
yeah. So we're talking about Lifeless Frontier.
Yes. I mean, I don't like to say it, but it's kind of in the name. It is kind of lifeless, but...
Well, I think, like you said, I think he struggled with the 3D. And this was late PlayStation now. I think it was, 2002, 2003?
No, this came out on PlayStation 2.
Was there a PlayStation 2? I think he'd done most of the development, though, for PlayStation 1.
And then he ported it.
And then he ported it because, obviously, there was a fair amount of crossover still between the PS1 and the PS2 when they were available. So, I mean, I think that's part of why it got such a bad reception, is that for a game that came out a couple of years into the PlayStation 2's life, it still very much looks like a PlayStation 1 game.
Yep. To the point that it didn't even use the analog sticks. So it was it felt very early 3D, and you couldn't quite control the camera.
And I mean,
or anything
from
like
the very beginning, like you said, that this game starts off in that ice temple, but you could tell he was kind of at this point withholden to that idea of starting the next game from the previous game, because the fact that you walk out of the ice temple into a Western.
Yes.
Even the saloon doors in the Ice Temple, which look completely out of place, and now you're
kind of out
essentially
of
in a
place,
desert.
but the broken banjo on the ground, and as I said,
Yeah, look, there was some thematic elements through there, but again, like, because it was 3D, because it was early 3D, and his first foray into 3D, those visual elements that he had essentially perfected at that point, for Attack of the Banjo, just weren't there.
I didn't realise it till I played it this week, though, that they were cobwebs in the Ice Temple. So it wasn't the same character that you were playing. This is probably many years later, and you just happen to go to the Ice Temple, and you see like the broken banjo on the ground, and like
I appreciated that.
I didn't realise, but I thought it was the same character.
Oh right.
So I was surprised that he was no longer playing the banjo, and it was now.
I think a lot of people did think that, but the fact that he kind of walks through the saloon doors, puts on the cowboy hat, and now you're essentially in the desert, like, gets on his horse. It comes across as a bit weird, especially if, like a lot of people, you haven't played the previous games, because, being a very different genre, there are a lot of new players that came. This was their first Olli Zanetti game. It's a very weird beginning. But look, it was not. I would say it is not a good game. Like you said, very lifeless. There's a lot of just riding around the desert on your horse. I will say the horse mechanics for the time, like this is pre-Shadow of the Colossus, even, like, which obviously defines some really good horse riding stuff. But it worked pretty well.
I mean, Ico would probably only just come out at this stage. But Ico looks so much more like...
Well, that's it. Like, he didn't have... The thing is, I think this is where it really started to become clear that him doing almost everything himself is just not going to work from anymore, particularly in 3D. Like, his sort of style of animation was very much that SNES style, minimal frames... And he was very good at that. He was very good at creating expressive animations in minimal frames like that. But once you get to 3D, that just looks stilted and lifeless, which, man, come to think of it, I wonder if that was not the original name of the game, and he almost brought that in there to make it, as an excuse or a reason. But yeah, you'd ride around, you'd find these ghost towns. And again, like, there was some great story stuff. He was trying to fit the lore in there.
Yep.
But it wasn't quite the same. It didn't have that same depth. And I think...
There was a saloon that you could actually find, like, a miniature graveyard party board game. Like...
Yeah, he did manage to sneak that Easter egg in there.
Which is, again, like, he's moved on so far from where he started in the fact that, even in, Attack of the Banjo, you still had, like, those occult sort of things sort of overhanging. There was the whole Necromancer boss battle in the Castle Dracula.
Yeah.
Stuff. This didn't have much of that at all.
No, you can tell he's moved on. He's definitely in a different phase of his life by the time we get to this
one.
For
now.
Yeah.
We will get to
Yeah, and actually we might end up splitting this into two episodes, I think, because we're not even we're only just on the PlayStation 2, and we've been going for a bit, but we'll get through a couple more.
Yeah, and even then, like, he's got one more game on the PlayStation 2, and we'll talk about that today.
Yeah,
and
exactly. But yes, Lifeless Frontier. There's still. I think one of the things about this game is there is still he did a ton of writing for this. Again, threads that link back to the previous games. So, like, if you have played them all. It brings more depth and, like, recontextualizes certain characters that you had seen, even though this is obviously set so much later, there's relations and things that are in there successors. We call the children of anyway.
Yeah.
But because the towns are so far apart and like the getting between them is sort of such a tedious, boring task, you don't get that feeling of everything being linked in the same way. Because by the time you find the other person, in that story thread, you've put the game down 17 times because it takes because you've the world is huge, but it's empty. It's so empty.
Definitely so. I mean, now I'm thinking about it. They did that Silent Hill thing of, obviously you couldn't see too far ahead of you because usually the second that you got out into the desert, oh look, a sandstorm has come up, and it's like it's very hard to see, and so you could only see a couple of meters in front of you, and you just had to rely on your compass to take you in the right.
Well, that's it.
In the right direction. But the magnetic storms that they kept on happening, that kept on having your compass going round in a circle.
It really felt like padding. Obviously that worked for Silent Hill being in a slow-moving character in a small town. When you're traveling, miles and miles across desert and, only having paths that you could then barely see because of the, you're having to, if you lose that path, there's no easy way to find it again except for just wandering aimlessly with this, low visual range. And then also the fact that they didn't have any, and I mean, this wasn't that common at the time necessarily, but there was no, quest markers or, town markers or anything. There's no map. You had to rely on just directions from within the conversations you have with people of like, Merrittsville is northeast from here about 3 miles or whatever, and you can follow the path to get there. But yeah, if you go off that path in these sandstorms, then you're screwed.
Yeah, but from what in Olli's biography, he did actually say this harkens back to the old Sierra days where, as he was growing up, and he loved sitting down with his dad and drawing a map.
Yeah.
So that's why he wanted you to have to actually kind of draw the map yourself.
Yes, yeah.
But, yeah, as I think, as you said before, he changed the name to Lifeless because in between towns, it was literally just lifeless. There were no...
Wasn't even tumbleweeds.
No,
you could
no
have at least thrown some tumbleweeds in there.
Just sandstorms.
Yeah. Yeah. Which obviously was also... And I think a lot of this it obviously comes from his inexperience in 3D. Like, the sandstorms were obviously added as a late stage thing to deal with low frame rate issues for how big the space was that he was trying to show, that he was trying to show, like an optimization method. So
yeah, so I've got to say, I never finished this game. So
no. I've watched some videos of some of the like the end bits.
From what I hear, it takes a really weird twist at the end, and it wasn't necessarily all Western because it sort of explains what happens with the next game.
Well, that's
that
it. And so
quickly hit today.
And we'll quickly hit this game, but the fact that again, he's kind of a victim of his own success here and his own trends. He wanted to ensure that he could finish this game in the same spot as he starts the next one, but he kind of he kind of
shoehorned it into this game rather than shoehorning it the other way.
Exactly.
So, last ever game released for the PlayStation 2.
Yes, he does have that.
He uses analog sticks this time. Red Hot Plunger. I love this game. I think it's got such a cool idea. I mean, in the I don't know why, but in Germany, obviously they didn't like something about Red Hot and Plunger, so they called it the Dark Project. But it didn't quite work. It's kind of like when you think about Fahrenheit and Indigo Prophecy. Red Hot Plunger, the Dark Project. They go hand in hand in they were trying different things.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I thought the idea of having, a plumber as like the main character, yet he was actually a plumber and not just in namesake.
This was not a Mario situation.
Mario, but he was literally a plumber, and you spend the first half hour of the game, a la your Fahrenheit and that sort of stuff, playing literally as a plumber, going around fixing people's problems.
It obviously, this is it. It obviously was very strange that that Lifeless Frontier then ended in a outhouse that
was a rather modern outhouse.
That's it. Like with this modern, it's sort of this almost a weird, surreal Twin Peaks situation where after all this time of, and I guess it's not that far off since you left a fucking ice castle to get to this place, but that you end up in a modern bathroom and then, the game sort of just ends. But obviously became clear when Red Hot Plunger came out, and that's where it begins. Yeah, I felt like this game brought together... Well, and he'd realised by this point, if I'm going to actually do a proper game in 3D... I need a team. And, luckily enough, he was able to find a publisher that, based on his pre-Lifeless Frontier games, would give him the funding that he needed to make this happen, so that he could focus on the writing and the characters and the overall story, and let other people make it look good. And
this is where we get my favorite person within Olli Zanetti's sort of sphere of influence.
Yeah.
The artist simply known as Audrey.
Yeah.
Now, Audrey, no last name given. It's just
we only know it's Audrey.
Yep. They are around for the next 4 games after this.
At least playing a big part in, I think, the next 3, and then definitely had a lot of influence and helped with one after that. But
they just influenced the graphics so much that everything from here on out is
this is a
proper
controversial
3D.
It's a somewhat controversial thing, because I'm on the side that, well, obviously, Olli Zanetti's early games were amazing, and like I said, I think...
Attack of the Banjo is the best.
Even that Attack of the Banjo is the best game that he's built, but it's not until he started teaming up with Audrey that he really... I feel like that the team up with Audrey is really the actual sort of defining moment, because then the games that they made together... They're just so influential and so different. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people downplay Audrey's influence on the games, but Audrey coming in and giving their visual style to it, giving their technical expertise, giving their their ability to build things in 3D and make them look good. I don't think you can raise that up enough, actually. I think if Audrey hadn't come along, Olli Zanetti would not have made another good game.
No.
He was flailing in the modern modern age.
So let's talk about what Red Hot Plunger is about. So yes, the first half hour is all about the plumbing jobs and that sort of stuff. But it's after that prologue that the title card sort of comes up as Red Hot Plunger, and you find out that our character, who remains unnamed in this game, like a lot of his protagonists in the other games, didn't really get named, because I think then you could actually put yourself into there, and because they were...
Yeah, that's another controversial thing, actually, whether it... and these are just discussions that happen around his games, but whether it's the sort of typical, like, the player is a cipher, being like the ability for the player to put themselves in there, and I kind of tend towards this, that it's more that the player, at least in the previous games, maybe not with this one, but that it was Olli himself putting himself into that player and not wanting to name it, but that for all of those games, it was him.
They were all his characters are very androgynous, though. So they definitely don't have, and that remains throughout this whole thing, which is what I really like about these games. The fact that they could be anything, or they could be anyone.
Yeah, and I think that's what part of what made them very popular. But
I did notice in the debug mode, because Olli did give us the codes when we had our conversation a couple of weeks ago. He actually named the character Ego, and that was that was actually a thing from Sierra, that they named every single one of their characters internally as Ego, so that they basically knew which was the player character and could reference the NPCs by their own character.
Yeah, well, it didn't come out much prior to this in his games themselves, but like Olli is a big point-and-click adventure fan, and obviously that comes out somewhat in his writing, even though he's he doesn't write puzzles in that sort of adventure way. But
the fact that he hasn't yet done a point-and-click adventure game, is kind of crazy. But he keeps referencing, even in his biography, he references, the Sierra and LucasArts are like his, a lot of his background,
a lot of his memories from there, for sure.
30 minutes in, and the character gets a letter, and it's from Plumbing University, saying that he's got unpaid, like he never actually paid for his full tuition, and he now has to. He's not making enough money as a plumber. He now has to moonlight as another profession, and that's where the red hot comes in. Because this is where he takes on jobs as, like, a hitman.
Yes, using his skills that he has built as a plumber.
Yes.
He starts taking on assassination jobs. And it, for such an outlandish idea, it lands well.
Yeah, it does.
And I think that's where, again, his writing comes into it, because that first half hour is not just a tedious, you're going around plunging toilets and sinks.
No, I thought
you're meeting
if this is the game, you're meeting characters.
You're understanding more about the player character themselves, their situation, their personality,
and this doesn't go away. Like, you still got your day job, and then you just at night you do like a job or two, and then so it's sort of like you got 2 or 3 plumbing jobs during the day, and then you have one maybe 2 assassination missions, depending on how large the mission is, and then you meet some more characters and like.
And what I loved about this was that it was a mix of, during the day, a lot of that, like you were saying, the kind of Indigo Prophecy, the Quantic Dream style.
Taking the mundane and
just giving you some control over it, bringing in conversations. But then the assassination missions moved into almost a Splinter Cell-esque, like adding stealth elements, adding a lot more action-y kind of gameplay to it.
Very much so.
Without really shifting up the controls too much. It was just they did a very good job of contextually, making you understand how a particular control would work in that context.
What I did like is it wasn't, one of those typical assassination things of, you're going out and just killing random NPC X. You get a full dossier on how bad these people literally are. Like,
well, and again, and I feel like I'm always gushing about his writing, but this wasn't like this wasn't like so many of those assassination games where you receive that dossier and it's just like some random bad guy, even with backstory. A lot of the time, and
it's someone that you've been hearing about since the first.
But that's it. A lot of the time, it's either it's someone you've met, or it's someone that you have heard of, and you understand the relationships within this town, within your circle of people.
Yeah.
And exactly how that all connects in. And that just adds just such an extra layer of meaning to these kills.
Yeah.
In some cases...
And very classily done, too. Like, they're not...
Yeah. Well, and just like that, in some cases, you're like, oh, yeah, this person's a fucking prick. I have no... Like, they're, abusing their wife or whatever. Like, I have no problems dealing with this. And that's not even necessarily in the dossier. Again, that's just through your conversations and the way that it's all tied
and context. Because you've had conversations with these people. You've already comforted his wife. Like...
Exactly.
In one of the previous scenes, because it turns out that for this particular one, that I remember this one exactly, that you'd already been there earlier that day to fix a clog in their toilet.
Yep.
And you ended up spending half the time, just sitting on the bed, just listening to her story and that sort of stuff.
Well,
and
that's
then,
it. The fact that you comforted his wife and clogged his own shit out of his toilet already really gave you a reason or incentive to take him down.
What I did think was quite good is, obviously when. I mean, I suppose we can actually name this character. I mean, it's going back to 2004, 2005 when this game came out. So if you haven't played it by now, Brian didn't have the money to pay for it there. He said, "Come back later on tonight," and it was after you leave that you get given basically on your secret phone.
Yep.
We left a dossier at your place. This needs to be done ASAP. Like, needs to be done tonight. Yep. You go home and you find out that it's actually you've got to go back to Brian and take him out because he's actually a really, really bad guy. Like,
yeah, well, then you get, again, additional context, additional information that on top of what you know about how he's been treating his wife and
how many toilets he's been clogging up all over the city.
Yes, I was about to say, like, the damage that his dumps are done.
The amount of damage that he has done to the sewer systems across this whole city, like, because he flushes wet wipes. I mean,
yeah, and we all know it's not to be done.
The fatberg, like, that you have to deal with, like one of those sort of things harkening back to, the sewer missions from Attack of the Banjo, where you had to go down into the sewer and, like, you see like this huge iceberg like thing made of just wet wipes and shit and stuff that just like
that was a fun mission.
Had to break it up with the plunger, you're kind of whacking it for a while.
Well, I liked the way that they that mission starts as a regular plumber mission, but then it transitions into
assassinate the
like
yep.
Essentially. I like the way they played with that.
Oh god. This brings us to the end of part one of.
Yeah, I thought we'd get through it, but I mean, we knew that Olli's games would, there are a lot of them. He's got quite a history there. So, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed our deep dive.
Hey, weren't we in an impro thing called Deep Dive?
Oh, that's you can find it on the Impro Facebook page if you go back far enough. Yeah, I've enjoyed this. I think this is a fun new thing for us to dive back into some of our
those people who haven't heard about
game developers.
Olli Zanetti, he's a real person who made real games in Australia.
He's a real person who definitely exists,
and wasn't made up on the spot at all.
No, in fact, to prove that, I think we'll have to try to get him on. We're going to have to try and convince him to come on the show at some point. I don't know. I don't think we'll be able to get it for next week to talk about his games. We can try. But at least at some point, I think we need to get Olli on, even just to do some click pitch.
Yeah. That could be a bit of fun, and then maybe we'll we'll be able to help almost come up with the next Olli Zanetti game.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be awesome to have a Zanetti Studios game inspired by Bitstorm? So, if you want to find us online, go to podchaser.com/Bitstorm. You can find all our previous episodes there. Definitely go check out, if you dare, go and check out last week's episode with Alex Krauss, who's toiling away now
in the Vatican.
He's at the Vatican. We'll maybe give some updates on how that game's going later on. But then definitely in a more relevant link, go back to Jim Fishwick's episode from a couple of episodes ago, where he brought us the second person shooter history.
Yeah,
and we will continue next week with Olli Zanetti's,
as long as we remember.
I think we will. With Ollie's modern, more recent games.
And if you like the music that we play at the start and end of each episode, that is a song called Mantifying off of the album Containment Failure by the band Kuridas that Olli Zanetti did not have anything to do with whatsoever.
No. I'd love for him to use a Kuridas track in a future song. I feel like it could be up his alley.
It could be, but even if he just took inspiration and made a MIDI of it, that would be fine.
That's all right. So thank you again for joining us this week on Bitstorm. I'm Ben Slinger.
I'm Trevor Scott.
And I'm Olli Zanetti.
No, that was just me. I was pretending to be Olli Zanetti. That's not what he sounds like at all.
That's not what he sounds like at all. We're not going to make any offers to what Olli Zanetti sounds like on this episode.